Sure. I am delighted to be here and very excited about our time together and looking forward to input from you all as well. Looks like we have people literally from all over the world, so that is outstanding. Feel free always to ask questions or enter things. And it's terrific that I'm seeing people that I know and then also some new people. So that's well intentioned as well. So one of the things that I got you started thinking about was this Snickers candy bar. This actually was in my local paper just a few weeks ago in mid-January. And the reason is because that company, Mars Company, actually is here in Waco, not very far from where I live. And so there are some wonderful questions that you all are asking. One of the things that I thought about is I wonder how long it would take to eat it. That would be interesting. Okay. Many of you have identified things about various aspects of mathematics, including measurement as well as proportional reasoning. So some other things like that I think are very interesting. Many of you are also asking questions about, you wonder if it's bigger than maybe the last record-breaking one. Is there another one from another place? How does it compare? Somebody in one of my other groups wanted to know just how many peanuts did they have to have in order to make it. So anyway, a fun problem to get us to think about our own mathematical wonderings. So I hope that you will be looking for mathematical wonderings wherever you are, and in your newspaper, on the internet, wherever it is that you might notice these things out in your world. So I'm Trina Wilkerson, and I am delighted to be here. I am very excited to share with you some things about catalyzing change that NCTM is thinking about, and we would love to have your input on this as well. And I think there are things that we all can have ideas about starting those critical conversations, but notice in the title that I also want us to move to taking action. So toward the end of this, we're going to look at that. We're going to look at what kind of actions might you want to take in relation to this. The goals, there are four of them in particular. One is to share with you about the new publication from 2018 and the one coming out in 2020 that all relate to catalyzing change across grade levels. The first one was in high school. You'll hear us talk some about that, and you'll hear me also talk about the early childhood, elementary, and the middle school. We'll also look at maybe some of the challenges and opportunities related to pre-K through 12 mathematics. There are four recommendations that come out of these documents. And by the way, these documents are actually positions by the NCTM organization. So just something for you to think about. And then, as I said, I do want us to think about a plan of action. And notice it's to cultivate a positive math identity and strong sense of math agency for each and every student. And I would also add for each and every teacher as well. So I think those are both important for us to think about. First, I also want to invite you to a celebration coming up in just a couple of weeks now, about 3 weeks, the first week in April. We are going to be gathering the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics in Chicago, which is where it originated, and we will be celebrating our 100th year. And that's pretty exciting. We're very excited to be doing that. So I invite you to that celebration and hope you'll be able to go. To that end, one of the fun things that you might want to take some time to look at when you get a moment is NCTM has put together a 100-year timeline. And it actually starts even before 1920 when we started, but it's really fun to take a look at it and think about maybe what you were doing, maybe if you were a member of NCTM when that started, or if you've ever been a member of NCTM, or you're just interested in not only NCTM history, but also things going on in mathematics at that time. So there are also world events that may be in there as well, and it kind of helps us to think about perspective. Fun for me, I actually became a member of NCTM in 1976. So that was an important year for me, and it is where I have been ever since. But one of the neat things that happened during that time was the Mathematics Education Trust Fund was established. And this is grant funds that are for teachers and people who work with teachers to apply for, and it still exists today. Another fun thing is that was actually the same year that we started the National Metric Week. That's when that was started, and it was just right before that there was actually a metric board that actually there was some legislation passed around that. Been interesting that the U.S. itself did not move completely to the metric system as was thought. So other places in the world, that's what they use, but here in the U.S., we actually still use both systems. And then the last thing that was of interest for me when I became an NCTM member in 1976 was one of our affiliates, NCSM, the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics, who are actually math leaders across the U.S. and Canada in particular, but also people as international partners, is they actually wrote a position statement that really elevated problem solving as one of the very basic skills that all people needed. And this was very important because it moved beyond just procedures, but actually problem solving itself turned out to be a very important process that we need to consider in teaching mathematics. So when you get a chance, explore the timeline. It's a lot of fun to look at. One of the things that I thought about when I looked at NCTM turning 100 is it made me think about, how have we reached teachers over the past 100 years? And one of the interesting things when we started in 1920, we had the first annual meeting, and of course that was one of the ways to reach out to mathematics teachers. We also had a journal. The journal actually existed before 1920, but NCTM acquired it and started publishing it. But what's really cool these days is what's happening with us right now. And that's the fact that there are so many other ways using technology that we're able to connect math teachers across the world. Point is like this global math department. This is a way for all of us all over the world to be connected, to share things, to interact, to become part of a larger community. We still in NCTM, we still do have an annual meeting. It's attended by at least 8,000 people usually. Regionals we also have. But just think about all of the ways, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram's another one. And then we even have an online community within NCTM called My NCTM. So I think it's very powerful for us to think about how we connect with each other now. And again, the Global Math Department is one of those that connects across the whole world. So let's take a minute for you to do some thinking about who we are. Some of you have been introducing yourselves, and I thought we would try something here. If you want to, go to menti.com and you type in this code that I have just put in the chat box. It's 538180. So if you'll go to menti.com, and if you will, you can open up another window and type in that code 538180. It should take you to a place where you can identify who you are. You've got some different options to choose from. You might be there we go. So we've got a university person that put theirs in. You might be a teacher for grades pre-K through 5 or 6 through 8, 9, 12, a university teacher, college person, an administrator, math specialist. And I'm going to share my screen because this is really interesting. So if all goes well, and Sheila, we're going to see if I do this right. We're going to start sharing my screen. All right, here we go. Nope, wrong screen. All right, how about all right. I think you see that now. So this gives you an idea of who we all are. Menti.com, and you put in that 53, 81, and 80. And look at this. And it shifts as you're putting things in, but I think you can all see it now. Sheila, am I right that everybody can see it?
Yep, everyone will be able to see it.
Perfect. So look at this. So across the world right now, we have a nice balance of teachers from various grade levels, pre-K through 5. We have a large group from 6 through 8, and then a group from 9, 12. We have a large group of teacher, college, university folks. Math specialists, look at that, almost 1/3 are math specialists or coaches or something like that. We've got consultants, supervisors, directors. Then we've got some others. Maybe some of you could type in the chat box what some of those others might be. So if you're one of those others, maybe you can share with us who you are. So this gives us an idea of who we are at this time in this particular webinar. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing for just a little while. So now that we have an idea of who we are, and there we go. I think we're on track now. So that gives us an idea of who we are. NCTM, one of the things that I always try to make sure that I remind myself is that the advocation is for high quality math teaching and learning, but it's for each and every student. And I think that one of the things that we need to do is support teachers in doing that work. Our priorities have to do with teaching and learning, access, equity, empowerment, building member value and advocacy. And today we will actually address some of these as we think through this catalyzing change. So in 2018, just a couple of years ago in April, NCTM published a document called Catalyzing Change in High School Mathematics, and it was about initiating some critical conversations. And that particular position that NCTM took actually then made us think about not only if these are things that we want to think about for high school mathematics or secondary mathematics, depending where you are in the world. And by the way, yay, we have a doctoral student. That's outstanding. All right. And interventionist as well. Great. So when we're thinking about this, we realize that when you see the recommendations in a few minutes, that it's not just about high school, is that if there's some things that you want to happen in the secondary mathematics level, then there is also a connection to middle school mathematics, grades 6 through 8 about that, and then also early childhood and elementary. So this past year, we had a group of writers led by some exemplary folks that have actually written these two documents, and they will actually come out at our centennial celebration in April 2020. One of them is early childhood and elementary, and we were very deliberate in including early childhood because there's a need for emphasis on what kinds of mathematics needs to be going on at that particular level, all the way through elementary, and then middle levels, which is usually, at least in the United States, is grades 6 through 8, but that could change depending on where you are, what you might call those. So to that end, here's a question for you to respond in the chat box, if you will. So what might be some reasons that we need to think about catalyzing change in mathematics? Like, why now? So think about it in your own situation. Why might we need to think about some ways to be able to change things maybe that are happening in mathematics? Why for high school? Why for middle school, elementary, early childhood, pre-service and in-service teachers, teacher educators, parents, policymakers, administration, anyone who is a stakeholder? All right. Oh, and thank you, Carla. You work with teachers in 40 different elementary schools. Wow. All right, let's have you all type, why do we need to think about this question in mathematics today? Why is it important? There we go. Excellent. Apathy, justice, equity issues that we need to think about. Preparing students for a very different future that perhaps school was not originally designed for. It's a very good point. Oh, there's another great one, Delise. We have the future of our students to think about. And one of the things I think is interesting is that this future, we don't even know what it will be. Oh, great ones. Making that shift from teacher to student-led classrooms. Students talk to each other. Great. These are excellent. Excellent. So thinking in terms of that, I thought I would share two things. Now, I realize that we're international, so I'm going to show you two things. The first one is looking at NAEP. NAEP in the United States is the National Assessment for Educational Progress, and it's something that's been going on for quite a while. And it's a test that's given periodically to a sample across the United States. And one of the things that we have found is that over the last 10 years that we're actually fairly level. We're not really making a whole lot of progress. You can see it kind of goes up and down at different times. And in fact, the latest, the 2019, because that 10-year trend only goes up to 2012. But look at this. It's still sort of flat. Doesn't seem to be making a lot of difference. We're just sort of at a flatline kind of place. Now, keeping that in mind, though, this is just one snapshot of the impact of what's happening in mathematics. I also thought it might be interesting for us to think about PISA. So I found this picture, this graphic, and I thought you might take a look at this. And it's color-coded by performance in mathematics. I picked the one on mathematics. And PISA is the international test. And you can see there's some countries that are not engaged in it at this time. But you can look at from all the way below to above. So the question for you is, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What can we learn? So does anybody have any thoughts they want to share about what do you wonder? So we have some countries that are just making exemplary progress in mathematics. Oh, that's a good one. If we don't do it now, then when are we going to do it? That's a great one. Europe is very green. Okay. There you go. Canada has done really well on the PISA. So, what do they do? And what can we learn from each other? U.S. is falling behind. It's one of the things that we see. That's an interesting one. Kristen, I noticed colder climates are better in math. That's interesting. Yeah. And again, this is just one picture. This is just one picture of what's happening. So y'all are asking some really great questions. And it does boil down to, what can we learn from each other? It's not like you can take what's happening in one particular location and just drop it into another one. It's much more than that. There's some systemic things that have to be looked at. So if we move on just a little bit, just some things that I found interesting with the PISA study. There's lots of things you can read about it, but the 2018 one of the things that they have found is that gender differences now are smaller. Now that at one time there were large gaps between in gender, but now those have narrowed quite a bit. In fact, you can see boys outperformed girls by 5 points in math. Girls outperformed boys in science by 2 points. So there's not a huge gap anymore. But we're going to talk about that. One of the things that they have found, though, is that there is a clear difference between what males and females think that they can do in the future when they grow up. And they're finding that that's one of the things missing from what's happening now, is that the females are are not choosing careers that move into high levels of use of mathematics. And that's an interesting thing to think about. So it made the OCED to think about, we may be having some victories with that particular gap, but maybe there are other things we need to look at, which just points to how complex this is. Just to also share with you, we were talking about, why you need to do this. Y'all have got some really great things about questions that this does raise for us. One of the things we also need to keep in mind is there are a lot of great things that are happening. Even though, for instance, in the United States, we're still kind of leveled off. We're not progressing as much as we would like, at least according to a particular test. But one of the things that is happening now, at least in the U.S., we have many, many more students taking upper level mathematics classes than ever before. And that's been a tremendous increase, which goes to this idea of access and equity. We also have, here in the U.S., we have advanced placement classes, courses, particularly in AP Calculus, and then they also have statistics. And we're seeing a steady increase in that from all areas, okay? But what we are finding, though, is that there are opportunity gaps, that even though there are more students taking these higher level classes, there are more students taking advanced placements classes, there is still a gap between some of the marginalized groups. And this is a serious, serious thing for us to think about. There are still opportunity gaps. Every student is not receiving the opportunities to have access to the kind of mathematics that might move them forward, because just what you said, our future their future is dependent on this. So some of the challenges, at least for us in the U.S., has to do with the focus of pre-K through 12 mathematics. There's this idea of, in order to get to the level of rigor that we would like, there is just so much content that's expected. And maybe that's something that we need to look at more. We also have a lot of policy kinds of things in the United States that get in the way of some of the things that we're doing and have actually impacted what we are doing. Sometimes more testing has actually been a challenge for us. And I know many, many countries across the world experience this with testing and the impact that it has on students, impact it has on instruction and on learning. And so the bottom line is very complex. And NCTM in the Catalyzing Change for high school actually recognize this. It's very complex. It's not an easy thing, okay? So in this, there are 4 recommendations that will come out across all 3 of these documents. And of course, the actual publications for the elementary and early childhood and then the middle school will come out in April. But one of the things that's consistent is these 4 areas for recommendations. Okay. Ooh, and Bonnie, that's a really good wondering you have, if the opportunity gap is connected with where teachers choose to teach. That's a very interesting thing. And that's interesting across the world. There are some places across the world that you have particular places that you start when you teach, and then you stay there for a period of time, then you move to another situation. So there are a lot of moving parts in all of this. So going back to the recommendations, there are 4 of them that go around these 4 themes. One is broadening the purposes of learning mathematics. So we're going to look at, what's the purpose of learning mathematics? And we want to think about maybe we need to broaden that purpose. The second one has to do with equitable structures in mathematics. And we'll talk about what that means in just a few minutes. But that's a really important piece of this. And you often hear the third one is really having the type of instructional practices that are equitable. So you have these equitable structures that are in place in a school system that impact the teaching and learning of mathematics. But you also have equitable instructional things that happen as well. And then the last one is this idea of developing a really deep mathematical understanding and what that means across grade levels. So we're going to hit on each one of these, and certainly feel free to share your wonderings and things like that. We'll have an interactive piece in just a minute. So with the broadening of the purposes, this actually has one of my favorite pieces in it. But the idea is that every student, each and every one of them, needs to develop this deep math understanding. But the reason is so they can expand their professional opportunities. You mentioned this earlier. Our world is changing. And so we're trying to prepare students for a world that maybe we don't even know exactly what it's going to look like, particularly if you're teaching early childhood, kindergarten, first, second grade, those early years. You can only imagine what their world's going to be like when they get to be in their 20s, 25, 30, that kind of thing. And they're moving into the world to take on responsibilities for things. The second one, why we need to do this is to help our students develop a positive math identity. And I would even venture to say to help teachers develop a mathematical positive identity. The third one has us think about actually 2 of the things that we've looked at, the graph that we saw earlier, even the Snicker bars thing, is to really understand and critique our world. Even the virus that's going around the world right now, this is something that our students, as they're growing up and they're teaching and they're learning in their math classes, they need to understand how to understand graphs and what they mean, what are the implications, how to look at data and how to use that. So they need to be able to understand and critique, I can't even talk tonight, critique the world they're in. The last one is my favorite, is that one of the purposes has to do with experiencing the joy, wonder, and beauty of mathematics. And I think sometimes we forget about this, that we forget that there is just tremendous joy and wonder in mathematics. And it's one of the things that drew me to mathematics is I think it is just so wonderful how it all fits together. And I love just doing the mathematics. Applying it, of course, is important, but I just love doing the mathematics as well. So I think that's an important piece for us to keep in mind. All right, so we're going to get ready and do something. Some of you may be familiar. This is a new book that came out. Dr. Sue actually wrote Mathematics for Human Flourishing, but a few years ago, in 2017, he gave a talk about this, and now it's a book. But he said, you need to think about why you learn mathematics. And he thinks it's that, it seems a relatively simple question, something to really reflect on. But the reason it's important for each of us in whatever role we're in, and we have a whole series of different roles that you all are in, what's important is to think about why we need to learn mathematics, because how we think of that will impact what we're doing with mathematics, who you think should be doing mathematics, and it also impacts how teachers will teach it. So whatever it is that you believe about why you need to learn mathematics, it will impact who you think should be doing it and how it will be taught. So your own beliefs and expectations actually influence those decisions about teaching and learning. So it's very important for us to think about that. All right. So I've got another interactive piece in just a minute. So when you look at this is something you can type in the box there, and you experience wonder, joy, and beauty. When you look at this picture, what do you wonder? What do you wonder? What do you wonder? Do we have any wonderings when you see that piece of art? Here we go. Oh, great question. What are the decisions, the mathematical decision making behind doing that? Okay. Where do the steps go? Love it. Perspectives, visualization, how it was constructed. And think about what students could do with something like this, building their own, understanding the mathematics behind it. So just another beautiful picture. I also wanted to share something that's one of my favorite. Buckminster Fuller was an architect that was very well known. The other thing is that he's actually the one that popularized geodesic domes. I don't know if some of you may remember that. Ooh, Laura, good one. I wonder if anyone else sees the number 101. Ah. Wow. Love it. So I love what he said, though, because, as I said, he was a famous architect, did a lot of work with geodesic domes and things like that. But one of the things that he says is that when he solves this problem, he said, when I finished, if the solution is not beautiful, I know it's wrong. So he loved beautiful solutions. That doesn't mean hard, doesn't mean complicated. It just means solving it is a beautiful part of the mathematics. So time for you to do some interacting. So ready? So let me get back to give you the code. So this one is, if you're going to have an environment that really supports wonderings, asking questions, and leading to dialogue, what are the characteristics? Now, in this particular one, you can put in one-word answers. 782177 is the code, 782177. And in this particular one, you can enter up to 3 entries at any one time. They have to be one word. You can trick it by putting a dash between it, a hyphen between it. If you needed 2 words, you can trick it. And then the other thing that will happen when I show this is that when people enter things, if you agree or you want to agree with that, you can submit another entry. Okay, so you don't have to just enter one time. You can actually enter multiple times, but only can do 3 words at a time. So I'm going to share my screen again. So Sheila, we're going to hope this goes well again. We're going to share again. And hopefully I'm sharing the right screen. Here we go. There we go. And remember, if you see a word that you agree with or you like that particular one, you can re-enter it. So this does like a word cloud. Very nice, very nice. So keep adding to it. So as you're entering things and you're watching it change, maybe type in the chat box, what are some things that you notice? What do you notice? So what do you notice? I love that safe is right in the middle. Forgiving, I like that. Shared authority. Oh, way to go. I love that. The rich math task, you were able to put it all together, and that makes it one word. So Cindy, I think, and Bonnie, both of you are talking about this key ingredient is this safety, this being able to take risk. And I would also venture to say something I've been thinking about lately is we need to give this same kind of thing to teachers, that where they can take a risk, that they have a safe environment in which to work on teaching strategies, etc. Okay. So very good. Autonomy, relationships, engaging. Good point, Sheila. Practices or problems need to be set up to allow for that space. Oh, and Sarah, you're making a really good point of how these connected. The risks, the opportunities to make the mistakes, and that it's safe, but it all hinges on those relationships that you developed. Very powerful. Celebrate failure. I don't think we do that enough. Student-led intellectually and engaging. Very good. Very good. It's also interesting that mathematics is there. Okay, it shows up quite a bit. That's a good thing. So this learning environment that supports wonderings, questioning, and it says leading, but it's supposed to be learning, I believe. It's really important that we center on rich mathematics and we provide the kind of environment that allows for this. Okay, good deal. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but you certainly can keep adding things as you think about it. You certainly can do that. All right. All right, Sheila, should be back to you, I think, now. There we go. All right, so these are characteristics that help us in wondering, asking questions, and leading the dialogue. Okay? All right, very good. So let's let you do some wondering. So one of the things that I hope that you will do is, as you're going throughout your daily lives, whether it's travels to other places in the world, or you'll see in a minute just everyday things that are happening, that you will really look and notice at the mathematics that you see and do your own wondering. But this is also the kind of thing that we need to get students to think about. We need them to think about what is their wondering. So these are places, one of them, the top left is a carpet. But look at the mathematics. I remember my students used to do constructions for these things. I taught high school for a long time. And one of the things that we worked on were the constructions and how all that worked together. And it actually comes out in designs of all kinds. The one in the center, some nice math and science there. This is actually a geyser in Hawaii. And timing it and looking at how it works and the water displacement, etc. All powerful. I believe the one on the bottom left, I believe is in Berlin. Lots of things to think about with those particular columns. And then you've got The Pantheon, I think, is the one on the bottom right. But these are all things that you can think about and look at the mathematics behind those and have students notice those things, work on equations that relate to them, collect data about them, etc. This is one of my fun ones. This is just everyday things. That top left, those are shoes, bowling shoes, actually. And these are one of my students and her boyfriend. She's actually about half as tall as he is. And so she came up with this in thinking about all kinds of questions she could ask. So I'm going to stop for just a minute and let you look at some of these pictures. Pick one you think you find interesting, and what do you wonder about it? What do you notice mathematically? Sarah, you make a good point. We have to feel that we're safe, even as teachers. So what do you wonder? Pick you one of the pictures. What's the math you wonder about? Oh, good one, Shelley. The area of the vinyl records in comparison to the area between the records, which is, by the way, one of the key mathematical concepts students need to understand. Ooh, how many minutes of music? There you go. Oh, the pool. This pool was outside of a hotel I was staying at one time, and wonderful questions on not only the shapes, but also the volume. How long would it take to fill it up? How much water is needed? Okay. The child in the tire, it's actually one of my friend's son, and she allowed me to share this. And isn't that just unbelievable to think about the questions that you could ask with that? Ah, you noticed the missing record as well. I'm glad you brought up the bear because I couldn't help but share that. I actually teach at Baylor University, and we're the Baylor Bears, and so I just had to throw that one in. But I also love the golden ratio and all of the work that goes into that, all the mathematics there. Look at that. We've got tangents, outstanding. Lots of wonderings, lots of things to build on. All right. So going back to the environment, thinking about what you all shared about what that environment needed to look like, these are just some to recap. We need to consider the environment, making sure that it supports emergent mathematicians, that it gives our students the opportunities to be mathematicians, that it's empowering, that it provides for that curiosity, that natural curiosity. Often when students come in pre-K through 2, pre-K through upper elementary, they have a lot of things that they're curious about. It's very natural to be curious, and they want to know. They wonder. They want to know why. All right. But at some point, sometimes our students lose that curiosity. And I've often wondered if, as a high school math teacher, I contributed to that. Did I allow them to really be naturally curious? Did I give them time to do it? Okay. We need to recognize students as doers of math that look for that joy and beauty in mathematics. This kind of environment really needs to support a positive math identity and agency for students, and that doesn't come easily. Okay? And we need to grow intrinsic motivation. There's a lot of research out there about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, but we sometimes need to help our students and help teachers learn how to grow their intrinsic motivation, that they want to know, that they want to learn, that they want to have these inquiries about mathematics. Encouraging questioning, very important. And I mean really having students ask questions. One of my favorite things was when I would be walking around the room and they were asking each other the kinds of questions to get deeper into the mathematics. And it was so empowering. And then valuing student voice. And somebody put that in theirs, in this other word cloud that we were looking at, that we need to acknowledge student voice. So I just want us to also to think about, what happens if we don't do this? What happens if we don't offer this kind of environment? And these are just some things that it does. It's very limiting. It widens those gaps. It inhibits math learning. and it impacts the development of the identity and agency that we want in our students. So there are 4 recommendations. I spent a lot on the first one, a lot of time on the first one, but the others I'm going to go through just very briefly some things to talk about with it. One of them has to do with those equitable structures. And what we want to do is dismantle some of those inequitable practices. And they may be different depending on where you are in the world. What are the kind of inequitable practices that you think that really inhibit the kind of learning and the kind of teaching that you want to take place? Some of the recommendations that are being talked about in these books has to do with the idea of teachers who are tracked, students who are tracked, and ability grouping that actually happens. And, we all have different opinions and things like that about what these things mean. But one of the things that happens with the ability grouping and then ending up tracking students is there are students who get left out, that they don't get the kinds of opportunities that they need. And even with tracking teachers, there can be issues with that. And some of you have already mentioned it in the chat box of teachers and some of the difficulties that they have of being tracked in certain ways. So we have a lot of inequities that we have to deal with: gender, racial, ability, ethnic, language, socioeconomic. And what happens, the research shows that the inequities exist, and what happens is they don't experience the same mathematics, that they get a different kind of mathematical learning, environment, and opportunity. And we need all students to have the right kind of access, that access to all kinds of rigorous, not meaning rigorous as hard, but really engaging deep, thoughtful mathematics. There are a lot of barriers. When we have these very strict pathways that you take this, then you take this, then you take this, that's what happens in high school. And if you are not given the opportunity to take a number of different kinds of things, then it limits your opportunities. So one of the things that's advocated for in this Catalyzing Change is that there be some common pathways that some of our students actually take, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. With regard to teachers, I know for me, when I was able to teach a number of different, like I taught algebras and geometries and I taught calculus, the more experiences I had, the better I understood the full curriculum. And sometimes what research shows is that sometimes teachers who are just getting started and they're still learning, that sometimes they are given some of the most challenging teaching assignments, which might not be a terrible thing, but they need mentoring. If you're going to have new teachers coming in, they need to be mentored. We want them to be able to have the opportunity to learn and grow. The other is inequitable math strategies, the instructional strategies that go along with this. And we need them to be research informed and equitable. So how do we do that? What does that look like? So this is just a sample problem, has to do with ducklings. And it's some data that's given, and it asks some questions. But when you pick a task to give to students, you have to think about things. You have to think about the instructional decisions that you have to make. Who is this type task appropriate for? What kind of mathematics are you trying to get them to understand more deeply? Okay. Do you make a good point? Ability grouping has been building in instructional gaps. We've been creating those gaps ourselves. Okay. So Laura, you make a good point about, some places I've renamed that ability grouping, flexible grouping. The question arises for some is just how flexible it is it? Sometimes if that flexibility allows them to move from group to group or allows them to move from concept to concept, those can be very powerful. Or do they get stuck in a particular track? Okay. There you go. Good one. So one of the things about our instructional decisions is really thinking about what we're going to teach, why we're going to teach it, how we're going to ask the questions, how are we going to set up the problem, and what kinds of questions and opportunities will our students have? What kinds of representations will they be able to use? All right, so here's another one that I want you to think about. So this will be our last one to do some data entering. When you think about strength and assets in teaching and learning math today, think about your own area, whether it's your classroom, whether it's teachers that you work with, whether it's the district that you're in, whether it's the teacher education program you're in. What do you view as the greatest strength or asset in teaching and learning mathematics today? What are our greatest assets, okay, and strengths? So looking at this as from a positive framework. So I'm going to give you a code in just a minute. All right, so what are the greatest strengths and assets that you see in teaching and learning mathematics today? And the code is 81 64 12. 81 64 12. All right. So what are some strengths and assets that you see today in teaching and learning mathematics where you are? Curiosity. Very good. Oh, I got to share my screen. Sorry. All right, here we go. What are assets that you see? And again, you can enter one word up to 3. You can add more entries if you want to enter more than once. I love it. Dedicated teachers. I think that is one of our greatest assets. Okay. Technology. Technology can be very powerful. Can be very, very powerful. Perseverance. Another important one. Another important one. Okay. More and more opportunities for students to reflect on their own learning. Very powerful. And definitely a strength. Lots of discourse. I think more and more of us are moving to having our students really discuss things, to talk about things, to discover. All right. Growth mindset. That one's come up. Very important. Defending and thinking, giving students opportunities to justify their answers, to think about. Okay. I like this. An asset is the actual content. It's the mathematics itself. Outstanding. So when you look at the things that you see on the screen that others are offering about the assets for teaching and learning math today. Oh, there you go, Megan. Another one is student talk. Exactly. What encourages you about seeing this word graphic when we think about assets and strengths in teaching and learning? So some of you come in the chat box. What is encouraging to you when you read this? What is encouraging to you? Collaboration. Yeah. Similar thinking. Angela, I was thinking that as well. It's wonderful to know that across the world, these are things that we're thinking about. Yes, Sarah, we're not alone. Okay. Very powerful about the interactions. Excellent. Excellent. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to our PowerPoint. We were talking about instructional strategies. So when we think about instructional strategies, Principles to Action that came out in 2014 really highlighted 4 areas that we think about for each and every student. One of them is the access, equity, empowerment that we've talked about, this rigorous and engaging mathematics, this developing positive identity so that students see themselves as doers of mathematics. And then, as you mentioned in the word cloud just a few minutes ago, the mathematics itself is very important. So to do that, we've offered, there's these 8 mathematics teaching practices, and I think these are very powerful. Oh, good, Cindy. Yeah, that's a good point. The word clouds. Okay. All right. So in these teaching practices, when we think about these, we need to think about how we use these in order to really engage students. How do we get these to work for us and to move forward forward in effective teaching practices so that the kind of instruction that's needed that you've outlined in this strengths and assets that we have, that it actually occurs in the classroom for each and every student. Okay, so these are very important. One of my favorites is number 7, the productive struggle, because one of the things in working with pre-service teachers is really differentiating between just struggle and whether it's productive or not. But you will notice that 4 and 5 connect very well with what you thought of as assets and strengths, this idea of having the kinds of discourse and conversations in classrooms. So very important, very powerful. So these equitable teaching practices, we need to think about our own practices. How do we support teachers? How do we help pre-service teachers? How do we study our own practice? Okay, whether we're a teacher in a mathematics classroom in pre-K through 12, or if we're working with pre-service teachers, or we're doing professional development for teachers, or we're studying it. Several of you mentioned that you're researchers and you're studying this. So how do we examine our own practices? How do we think about how to make math more accessible to every student? How do we help them become, knowers and doers of mathematics and have that really strong identity? Okay. So the last recommendation has to do with this developing deep mathematical understanding. And if you go back and think about what we saw in the testing results with NAEP and PISA, this is one of the things we need to think about. We want our students, our learners, to develop really deep understanding. To do that, they have to have a strong foundation. And that starts in pre-K, goes all the way through, their senior years, their high school years, secondary years. You need to think about what's the common mathematics that they need to have before they begin to take other pathways. In high school, the high school book proposes that there's 2 or 3 years of just really strong mathematics that every student needs, and then they can take pathways from that to explore other mathematics that they may be interested in. And then the role of reasoning and sense making, which is very powerful, very powerful. Okay. So really looking at our math courses that we're teaching, whether they're in high school or if they're third grade mathematics, whatever we're teaching, they require a lot of clarity, precision in reasoning, some very focused, significant mathematics. And we need to look at our standards, our curriculum, the things that we're teaching. We need to maintain the integrity. And this is one of the things that comes up with this access and equity. Sometimes when we don't have high expectations of our students, we sort of water down the mathematics. And research actually informs us that if we have those high expectations, if we provide the right kinds of learning experiences, students will work up to those expectations. We need to have coherent mathematical progressions in learning, not things that just get us a credit in mathematics and then move on. Okay? And then we need to approach mathematics in a balanced way, instructionally. So let's just get this conversation started. Let's think about how we empower our students and our teachers as we're moving forward in this. So one of the things that I want to do is just to remind us that we all have a voice in this. We earlier talked about you identified who you were. I may not have covered everybody in this list, but I'd like for you to share in the chat box for just a minute. What is it that in your role that you can do to take action about things that you think need to be changed or further developed in the teaching and learning of mathematics in your own situation, whatever space that might be? So I'm going to stop talking a minute and let you all think, what kind of action might you consider taking? I love that, Chris. I'm listening to our students and allowing them time. Yes. I like that, Laura. Rediscover that natural curiosity. There you go. Share what you've learned and be a voice for students. And we need to be advocates for learners. Good point, Sarah. Share excitement about mathematics. I can tell you, if we don't find the joy and excitement in the mathematics, our students are not likely to. So what kind of actions can you take? It could be within your own classroom, working with teachers, as Cindy, as you're talking about. It can be at administration level, might be district-wide. What about policymakers? How do we help change policy if that happens to be part of the problem? Professional development, textbooks. Good point, Jamie. Okay. Good point, Latrenda. We need to model these practices as well. Excellent. All right, so as we're closing out, we need to really start that conversation, engage all stakeholders. It's not just us by ourselves. We're all in this together. So there's actions that we need to start thinking about and how we go about doing that. I wanted to share with you, just to close out, as you may recall at the beginning, I shared with you the mathematics teacher is where we started in thinking about one of the ways to communicate and connect teachers with teaching and learning. Well, at NCTM, we have a new journal. We've actually we no longer have the three, the mathematics teacher, the middle school journal, and the teaching children mathematics, but instead there's one journal called Mathematics Teacher, Learning and Teaching pre-K through 12, and it is now digital as well as you can get it in print. But the beauty of the digital is so that you can interact with it and you can see videos, so we can do what you were talking about. We can actually see people doing this work. We can hear about others doing this work. So having that opportunity is a way for us to share and to connect teaching and learning across all grade levels. And then finally, those conferences that we go to, of course, since I'm from NCTM, I'm actually sharing those with you. But thinking about our own professional development, how do we continue to learn? How do we find other people to network with to actually make some changes in the future where they might need to be? So what I'd like for you to do is certainly let me know if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts. I've had a wonderful time reading in the chat box, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here. So Sheila, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I wish us all luck in having those critical conversations, but moving to action.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful. So for everyone, let me stop the recording. So for everyone here tonight, just so you know, the webinar